No, he died by himself, Artyom said, not having the strength to explain the circumstances of Bourbon's death, which he himself was only just starting to get his head around. It's a long story. I'll tell you later. The tunnel suddenly widened, and they appeared to have arrived at the station. Something seemed strange to Artyom here, something unusual, and a few seconds later he understood what it was. It's what? Dark here? He asked his companion in dismay. There's no authorities here, the man replied. So, there's no one to provide light for the people. That's why whoever needs light has to get it himself. But don't be afraid. Luckily, I'm acquainted with the top ranks. And he quickly climbed onto the platform and held out a hand to Artyom. They turned into the first archway and went into a hall. There was only one long passage, a colonnade with arches on both sides, and the usual iron walls, installed escalators, barely lighted by weak little fires, and most of it plunged into darkness. Sekharovskaya was an oppressive vision and very sad. Crowds of people swarmed around the fires. Some were sleeping on the floor, and strange, half-bent figures in rags wandered from fire to fire. They were all clustered in the middle of the hall, as far from the tunnel as they could be. The bonfire to which the stranger led Artyom was noticeably brighter than the rest of them, and it was located in the center of the platform. One day this station will burn to the ground, Artyom thought aloud, looking despondently at the hall. In 420 days, my companion said calmly. So it's best you leave before then. In any case, that's what I plan to do. How do you know? Artyom asked and froze, remembering a flash all that he had heard about magicians and psychics, and scrutinizing the face of his companion, looking for the markings of unearthly knowledge. The mother heart python is unsettled, he answered, smiling. Okay, that's all. You must have a sleep, and then we'll introduce ourselves and have a talk. With these last words, Artyom suddenly was overcome by monstrous fatigue, which had accumulated in the tunnel before Rizskaya. In his nightmares, in the recent tests of his will, Artyom had no more strength to resist, and he got down onto a piece of turpulin that was spread near the fire, and put his rucksack under his head and fell into a long, deep, and dreamless sleep. The ceiling was so sooty that there wasn't a trace left of the whitewash that had once been applied to it. Artyom looked dully at it, not knowing quite where he was. "You're awake," he heard a familiar voice, forcing the scattering of thoughts to build a picture of yesterday's, was it yesterday, events. It all seems unreal to him now, opaque, like a fog, the wall of sleep and separated actuality from recollections. "Good evening," Artyom said to the man who found him. He was sitting on the other side of the fire, and Artyom could see him through the flames. There was a mysterious, even mystical quality to the man's face. "Now we can introduce ourselves to each other. I have a regular name, similar to all the other people that surround you in your life. It's too long, and it says nothing about me. But I am the latest incarnation of Genghis Khan, and so you can call me Khan. It's shorter." "Genghis Khan?" Artyom looked at the man disbelievingly. Artyom didn't believe in reincarnation. "My friend," Khan objected as though insulting, "you don't need to look into my eyes and at my behavior with such obvious suspicion. I have been incarnated in various others and more easily acceptable forms too. But Genghis Khan remains the most significant stage of my path, even though I don't remember anything from that life, unfortunately." "So why Khan and not Genghis?" Artyom pushed forward. "Khan isn't a surname after all. It's just a professional assignation, if I remember correctly. It brings up necessary reference, not to mention Genghis Antimatov," his companion said reluctantly and incomprehensibly. "And by the way, I don't consider it my duty to explain the origins of my name to whoever asks. What's your name?" "I'm Artyom, and I don't know who I was in a previous life. Maybe my name was also a little more resounding back then," said Artyom. "Nice to meet you," Khan said, obviously completely satisfied with his answer. "I hope you will share my modest meal," he added, lifting the hanging and battered metal kettle over the fire. It was just like the ones that they had at the Northern Patrol of VDNKH. Artyom stood up and put his hand on his rucksack and pulled out a stick of sausage which he'd acquired on his way from VDNKH. He cut off several pieces with his penknife and put them on a clean rag that was also inside his rucksack. "Here," he extended it towards his new acquaintance, "to go with tea. Khan's tea was BDNKHT, which Artyom recognized. Sipping the tea from an enameled metal mug, he silently recalled the events of the day before. His host obviously was also thinking his own thoughts, and he didn't bother Artyom. The madness lashed at the world from the broken pipes seemed to have a different effect on everyone. Artyom was able to hear it simply as a deafening noise that didn't let him concentrate. A noise which killed your thoughts but spared your mind itself, whereas Bourbon simply couldn't stand the powerful attack and died. Artyom hadn't expected that the noise could actually kill someone. Otherwise, he would have never had agreed to take one step into the black tunnel between Prospect Mir and Sakharovskaya. This time, the noise had snuck up surreptitiously, at first dulling the senses. Artyom was not sure that all usual sounds had been muted and the noise itself had been inaudible at first, but then it froze the flow of thoughts so they were suddenly covered with the hoarfrost of weakness, and finally it delivered its crushing blow. And why hadn't he immediately noticed that Bourbon had suddenly started talking in terms that he couldn't possibly have known, even if he had read lots of apocalyptic prophecies? The noise went deeper into Bourbon, as if bewitching him, and in a strange intoxication had taken hold. Artyom himself had been thinking all sorts of rubbish about the fact that he mustn't go silent, that they had to keep talking, but it hadn't occurred to him to try to figure out what was going on. Something had been interfering. He wanted to throw all that had happened out of his consciousness, to forget it all. It was impossible to get his head around it. In all his years at VDNKH, he had only heard about such feelings or such things. It had been easier to think that anything he'd heard was just not possible in this world. Artyom shook his head and looked from side to side again. The same suffocating twilight filled the space. Artyom thought that it had probably never been light here, and that it could only get darker. When the fuel reserves for the fire ended, the clock above the entrance to the tunnel had stopped ticking a long time ago, since there was no one who took care of such things. Artyom wondered why Khan had said good evening to him, because according to his calculations it should be morning or midday. Is it really evening? He asked Khan, puzzled. It's evening for me, Khan replied pensively. What do you mean? Artyom didn't understand. See, Artyom, You obviously come from a station where the clock works, and you all look at it in awe, comparing the time on your wristwatch to the red numbers above the tunnel entrance. For you, time is the same for everyone, just like light. Well, here it's the opposite. Nothing is anyone else's business. No one is obliged to make sure there's light for all the people who have made their way here. Go up to anyone here and suggest just that, and it will seem absurd to them. Whoever needs light has to bring it here with them. It's the same with time. Whoever needs to know the time, whoever is afraid of chaos, needs to bring their own time with them. Everyone keeps some time here, their own time. And it's different for everybody, and it depends on their calculations. But they're not equally right, and each person believes in their own time and subordinates their life to its rhythms. For me, it's everything right now. For you, it's morning. Or for me, it's evening right now. For you, it's morning. And what? People like you are so careful about storing up the hours you spend wandering, just as ancient people kept pieces of glowing coal in smoldering crucibles, hoping to resurrect fire from them. But there are others who lost their piece of coal, maybe even threw it away. You know, in the metro, it is basically always nighttime, and it makes no sense to keep track of time here so painstakingly. Explode your hours and you'll see how time will transform. It's very interesting. It changes. You won't even recognize it. It will cease to be fragmented, broken into the sections of hours, minutes, and seconds. Time is like mercury. Scatter it and it will grow together again. It will again find its own integrity and determinacy. People tame it, shackle it into pocket watches and stopwatches. And for those who hold time on a chain, time flows evenly. But try to free it, and you will see. It flows differently from different people. From some it is slow and vicious, counted in the inhalations and exhalations of smoked cigarettes. For others, it races along, and they can only measure it in past lives. You think it's morning now. There is a great likelihood that you are right. There's a roughly 25% likelihood. Nevertheless, this morning of yours has no sense to it, since it's up there on the surface and there's no life up there anymore. Well, there's no more people anymore. Does what occurs above have value for those who never go there? No. So when I say good evening to you, if you like, you can answer good morning. There is no time in this station except perhaps one, and it's very strange. Now it is the 419th day, and I'm counting backwards. I went silent, he went silent, sipping on his hot tea, and Artyom thought it was funny when he remembered that at VDNK the station clock was treated as a holy thing, and any failure of it immediately put anyone nearby under the hot hand of blame. The authorities would be astonished to learn that time doesn't exist, that the thought of it had just been lost. What Khan had just described reminded Artyom of a funny thing that he had been surprised by repeatedly as he grew up. They say that before, when trains used to run in the wagons, they used to announce, "Be careful of the closed doors. The next stop is XYZ, and the next platform will appear on your left or right." He said, "It is true." Now, is it true? Does it seem strange to you? Khan raised his eyebrow. How could they tell which side of the platform would be on? If I'm coming from the south to the north, then the platform is on the right. If I'm coming from the north to the south, then it's on the left. And the seats on the train were against the walls of the train, if I remember right. So for the passengers, the platforms were either in front of them or behind them. Half of them on one side and the other half on the other, with different perspectives. You're right, Khan answered respectively. Basically, the train drivers were only speaking for themselves because they traveled in a compartment at the front, and for them, right was absolutely right, and left was absolutely left. So they must have mostly been saying it for their own benefit. So in principle, they might as well have said nothing. But I have heard these words since I was a child, and I was so used to them that I had never stopped to consider them. Some time passed, and then he said, "You promised to tell me what happened to your friend." Artyom paused for a moment, wondering if he should tell this man about the mysterious circumstances surrounding the death of Bourbon, about the noise that he had heard twice now in the last 24 hours, about his destructive influence on human reason, about his suffering and thoughts when he could hear the melody of the tunnel. And he decided that if there was anyone worth telling it all to, then it would be the person who sincerely considered himself to be the latest incarnation of Genghis Khan, and and for whom time doesn't exist. So he started to lay out his misadventure in a muddled, anxious way without observing the sequence of events, attempting to convey the various sensations he felt rather than the facts. "It's the voice of the dead," Khan said quietly after Artyom had completed his narrative. "What?" Artyom asked, surprised. "You heard the voices of the dead. You were saying that at the beginning it sounded like a whisper or a rustle." "Yes, that's them." "Which dead?" Artyom didn't quite understand. "All the people who have been dead in the metro since the beginning. This basically explains why I am the last incarnation of Genghis Khan. There won't be any more incarnations. Everyone has come to their end, my friend. I don't know quite how this has happened, but this time humanity has overdone it. There's no more heaven and no more hell. There isn't purgatory either. After the soul flies out from the body. I hope you at least believe in the immortal soul. Well, it has no refuge anymore. How many megatons and bevatons does it take to disperse the noosphere? That's that. It was as real as this kettle, and whatever you say, we weren't sparing of ourselves. We destroyed both heaven and hell. We now happen to live in this strange world, in a world where after death the soul must remain right where it is. You understand me? You will die, but your tormented soul will get reincarnated, but you won't get reincarnated anymore. And seeing as there is no more heaven, your soul won't get any peace and quiet. It is doomed to remain where you live your entire life, in the metro. Maybe I can't give you the exact philosophical explanation for why this is, but I know one thing for sure. In our world, the soul stays in the metro after death. It will rush around under the arches of these underground tunnels until the end of time, because there isn't anywhere for it to go. The metro combines material life with the hypostasis of the other world. Now Eden and the netherworld are here together. We live amidst the souls of the dead. They surround us in a full circle. All those that were here crushed by trains, shot, strangled, burnt, eaten by monsters. Those who died strange deaths about which no living being knows anything and won't ever be able to imagine. Long ago, I struggled to figure out why they would go. know where they would go, why their presence isn't felt every day, why you don't feel a light and cold gaze coming from the darkness. You are familiar with tunnel horror. No, you are familiar with tunnel horror? I thought before that the dead blindly followed us through tunnels, step by step, hiding in the darkness as soon as we turn to look. As soon as we turn to look. Eyes are useless. You won't see the dead with them, but the ants that run along your spine, the hair standing on end, the chill which shakes your body, they are all witness to the invisible pursuit. That's what I thought before, but now your story has explained much to me.